I grew up in a farm, and I grew up eating very, natural, food. And when I went gluten-free in my mid-20s, it was incredibly frustrating. Woke up one morning and just went, wait a minute, I know how to cook and bake. I know how to solve this. And so I just started baking for myself. I started doing my own product development just for myself.
How did you come up with this concept?
Yeah, so the idea behind Nuflours, it has a lot to do with, food accessibility, like I mentioned. So just putting good quality products out there. Right. That as a dietarily challenged person, you not only want to eat because you miss your bread or you miss your cookies or whatever, but they're good enough to share. I had some really amazing mentors early on. It did take me about 2 years really to kind of get my sea legs under me, so to speak, and really learn, what is it like to actually run a business, not work in a business? What's it like to manage people? Things shut down pretty quickly here. And it went from, oh, this is going to be a brief shutdown to I have to lay off my entire team to survive. And I've got to say, that was one of the toughest things I've ever done.
All right, everyone, welcome back to SALESBIZ. I appreciate you all taking the time. Before we kick it off, folks, everyone knows the drill. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. Like this specific episode if you find any value out of it, and please drop us some comments down below. Today, my guest is a food and beverage industry professional. She has her own business for the last 10 years named Nuflours, which is a bakery that has a lot of interesting and awesome concept that I'd love to hear from her. I'm super excited to talk about her journey, specifically with how this pandemic has impacted her, and overall get her insight on how to start a business and manage it. Please welcome Phebe Rossi. Phoebe, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Thank you for taking time. Much appreciated. Let's kick it off, Phoebe. Once again, I was intrigued with your business, but let's take a step back before the actual business got started. Tell me a little bit about how you started in what inspired you to be in the food and beverage industry?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm an avid eater. And I'm I know, right? I'm so passionate about really good food. I grew up in a farm, and I grew up eating very, natural, food. And when I went gluten-free in my mid-20s, it was incredibly frustrating. At that point in time, gluten-free was barely on the national radar in terms of food trends. And so the options were, a tiny little frozen loaf of bread or a couple of tiny little options that were, shoved in the deep freeze in your, local grocery store. And so I woke up one morning and just went, wait a minute, I know how to cook and bake. I know how to solve this. And so I just started baking for myself. I started doing my own product development just for myself, very personally. I started baking my own brownies. I started making cakes again. And then I started taking them to parties. I started taking them to dinner parties and feeding friends again. And it kind of made me realize I was good at the product development side. So then I spent some time working on the business development side of it and realized that I really wanted to feed other people out there that were just like me. There's so many of us out there that want good food, want to share good food, and should have access to it.
Absolutely. Love the fact that you grew up on a farm. I grew up in a small village myself. What I remember is outside of the quality of the food, no pesticides, no preservatives, nothing like that. There was a whole lot of trade happening too. It's Mrs. Johnson had the milk, Mr. Franklin had the beans, and someone had the pickled tomatoes and all that good stuff. So did you have that kind of happening in your small town as well, of that people are kind of exchanging stuff?
A little bit. I come from a very large family, and so we we had a very large garden and did a lot of our own preserves. My mom used to joke that one year she put up, I think it was over 1,000 jars of canned peaches and pickles and jams and all of that, and we ate very well.
Sounds like you guys had your own village, so
just about.
That's amazing. Gluten-free. Was that a personal choice? Was that something that had to be done? And apologies if you don't have to get talk too much about medical stuff or anything, but I've had friends that, their doctor pretty much told them, hey, you should probably go on this route instead.
Yeah. So I have never been diagnosed celiac, but it turns out it does run in my family. in my late 20s, I was curious about doing a diet experimentation. So I did a self-diagnosed elimination diet because I was tired of feeling chronic fatigue. I had lifelong, very challenging skin issues, digestive issues, not as bad as some of the celiacs I've, met due to my business, but, and within about 2 days of going completely, I went gluten-free, dairy-free, soy-free.
Wow.
I felt fantastic. And I introduced soy and dairy back in. I've tried a couple of times, well, not in any year recent, but reintroducing gluten, and it's definitely a gluten issue. So it's very much my health is tied to keeping a cleaner diet.
Absolutely. Kudos to you. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Joel Furman. He has a nutritarian diet where you're just eating fruits and vegetables all day with little to no animal protein or anything. And I have to tell you, it was very hard to maintain, but it made me feel amazing. I was sleeping better. I was working better. I was laughing better. It seemed like a completely different game changer. How was that type of discipline though, in terms of you adopting something like that? Does it come naturally to you of, okay, I'm going to just reinvent my entire lifestyle?
I wish it did. No, I've got to say the first 3 weeks were the most difficult. But you reach a point where, at least for me, I literally don't have a choice. If I chose to go to a regular bakery, if I chose to eat the best croissant in town, I would eat a bite of it and I would spend the next couple of weeks paying for it. And so like my physical well-being matters so much to me that it's not worth like this minor indulgence at this point. Now, like I do have, some issues with dairy, but not bad enough to get me to stop eating cheese.
You and my wife would get along beautifully. She would join any diet possible. She's like, Atkins diet. That's the one that's all cheese, right? Okay, I'll do that one.
She does sound like my kind of people.
I was like, I don't know, honey, cholesterol, all that stuff, but I hear you. It's one thing that it was really hard to give up. There's a lot of it in my fridge. So that nutritarian diet, I was trying to figure out, is there some sort of carrot cheese out there I had, or it was not working out. So Nuflours, let's talk about it. You took that step. Clearly you had experience. You were cooking well. How did you come up with this concept?
Yeah, so the idea behind Nuflours, it has a lot to do with, food accessibility, like I mentioned. So just putting good quality products out there, right. That as a, dietarily challenged person, you not only want to eat because you want, you miss your bread or you miss your cookies or whatever, but they're good enough to share. So you don't, so you can show up to a birthday party and say, hey, I brought carrot cake. It's your favorite. Oh, and everybody wants to eat it because it's just darn good carrot cake. Right. So the product, portfolio that I ended up launching the business with was all about American comfort foods. So it was like chocolate chip cookies that were as big as your face and carrot cake. Back then we did an Earl Grey tea loaf and some really interesting, like very American style flavors. And then of course, over the years, the product lineup has changed, but we still offer that same classic carrot cake. It's far and away our bestseller, that and our classic dark fudgy chocolate brownies. And then we do, chocolate cake and some other really lovely classics like, basic American Danish with raspberry filling, a cheese Danish, those kinds of things.
I knew this episode would make me hungry.
Sorry, I wish I could send you a brownie through Zoom.
Oh, we're definitely talking about that. But I had a little dinner before this, but now it's like, okay, dessert time. Here we go. So you actually created all these recipes. You created this entire concept, or do you have partners, employees? Like how did the actual process start?
Yes. So at the early days, I did all of the product development, as a early stage entrepreneur, I was literally everything. I was customer service, I was product development, I was the sales team, I was the production team. That only lasted so long. But over the years, I had a business partner briefly. I bought her out. The concept, I had a very different concept for the future of the business. And I've had a couple of different employees over the years kind of wear that product development hat. So like one hire, she had a particular skill for developing yeast-based products, like breads, Danish cinnamon rolls. And she ended up redeveloping our entire line and just improving the texture and flavor profile, just taking it from like, oh, this is a nice gluten-free bread to, wow, this is an amazing gluten-free bread. Or this cinnamon roll is just like super buttery and rich now, instead of like, oh, it's nice. It's like, a whoa.
So you actually got some help, and in turn that ended up making the product a lot better, more attainable, better tasting, etc.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. And what about in terms of employee management? It's one thing to produce, it's one thing to bake for a party, and we'll talk about sales in a second, but what was that like, that learning curve of getting a partner and eventually buying a partner out, but managing employees? What was that learning curve, and where did you learn those skills?
I had some really amazing mentors early on. It did take me about 2 years really to kind of get my sea legs under me, so to speak, and really learn, what is it like to actually run a business, not work in a business? What's it like to manage people?
Right.
And it's so much beyond, developing systems and processes and just giving them, a basic, skill set and expectation. It's much more about being able to listen, and the compassion piece, and helping them understand, what's okay, what's not okay. In our industry, a lot of the work that I do around employee management is, a combination of, hard skills, like you're literally, running a dough sheeter and making, hundreds of pies. It's really around soft skills, like this is what it means to show up on time. This is what and here's the effect that it has on your coworkers. Here's what it means to, manage logistics, so a lot of those, personal interaction skills. And I didn't have those early on. I had some really amazing mentors help me learn those skills.
Yep. Cannot get by without those mentors.
Mm-hmm.
You could read a book, you could watch a show, listen to a podcast, but to have that one-on-one peer-to-peer interaction to really show you, or at least advise you into the right direction, I think
Mm-hmm.
is absolutely invaluable. Couldn't agree with you more. Did those mentors teach you sales? Because end of the day, that's what business is, right? It's how do we sell those cupcakes, cookies, cakes, etc. So tell us a little bit about one, where did you adopt your sales skills, and how has that impacted your specific business?
Mm-hmm. Sales skills, on the direct to consumer side, it was fairly self-taught. So much of what we did in the early days was around education and information. And because I came from the product development side of the business, I was all about, oh, you want to know about the flour, you want to know about ingredients, sourcing. I am a font of information. And so it was really understanding not just what the customer was asking, but what they were actually interested in, and guiding conversations that direction. And then, encouraging them to, not just buy the one thing that they were interested in, but try 5 more things because it was going to be that good. When it comes to our CPG line, and I know we'll be talking pivot here in a little bit, but really the direction the business has shifted, I realized it was more about having a very open-ended sales style, because what we do, it's a specialty baked product, and so we're in a niche of a niche market, so to speak. And while we do create a product that is approachable and available for everyone, the first, the wedge in the door, so to speak, is really selling it as, a gluten-free, allergen-friendly product, and making that first and foremost. And so it's not about us, it's about what we can do for your customers. And so it's getting our product into people's hands, and then helping them understand how we can really support their deeper sales, but not doing a hard sale, but a very soft sale.
Absolutely. And you mentioned business to consumer, which is obviously the majority of how businesses start. But what about going to actually business to business? Have you thought about going into the restaurants, the Whole Foods of the world, things of that nature? And what has that process been like for you?
Yeah, that was our pivot this last year. So I spent a fair amount of time prior to the pandemic, actually setting the business up strategically to grow, to scale pretty strategically in the B2B space. And then the pandemic hit early on, and I just went, what the heck, we're going to really lean into this new model. And so at this point, we have a small scale food service program, I call it. So, partnering with local coffee shops, cafes, restaurants. And then we're partnering and seeing pretty fantastic growth with our specialty retail partners. So right now, instead of targeting, the Kroger's of the world, we're looking at, your neighborhood co-op. We're looking at your neighborhood specialty store, like what Whole Foods used to be, back in the very early days. So those 15 to 20 location shops.
Got it.
Yeah.
Just kind of land and expand type of model where getting the product out there, getting more feedback. Understood.
Yeah.
What about from the FDA space? What was it like starting to manage regulatory and those random visits from the FDA and getting this approved and maintained, specifically in a much more niche environment like gluten-free bakery? What was that like for you in terms of setting it up? And did you see any sort of learning curves or any specific challenges around that?
There's definitely a learning curve, but I was thankful in that I asked a few people the right questions early on. And so they pointed out to me what were my, bare minimum, requirements, certifications in order to do what I needed to do. And then beyond that, I discovered that those regulators, the people that are coming in and doing those random site visits, they really want to see you succeed. And if you come at it from a support and desire to learn and understand and ask questions and are very responsive to their feedback, they're pretty supportive of you staying in business. It's when they come in and you get very aggressive or you don't have a very positive response, shall I say, to some of the things that they say. And sometimes they can be a little difficult to interact with. But if you come at it from a point of, how can I learn? How can I improve my processes? How can I improve, what we're doing here? They're generally pretty amazing. Yeah, and from there, I'd say it's really understanding what it is we're trying to accomplish, and then making sure that we have the certifications in place to do that. So, like I'm a women-owned business. I got women-owned certified very early on, even though we don't use it that much. It's really nice to say, when we're, approaching a very large buyer, like, hey, you say that you want to be supporting, minority and women-owned business. Well, we are certified. So what can we do for you?
Love it. Glad you brought that up, by the way. It's huge. It's better to, continue contributing to those levels of fairness and making sure you get your day in court, as I like to call it. Making sure that people realize the amount of work you put into it, because frankly told, not many women get that opportunity. So the fact that you're able to achieve that goal, that's amazing. Government, let's just get into it. Phoebe, as much as they want to help, sometimes it hurts, and I get, because to keep us safe, but this pandemic really came out of nowhere, specifically for small business owners. As someone that lives in California, we've been heavily impacted as well, as much as the majority of the world has been. But as an entrepreneur, and you've had this business for quite some time, so it seemed like you maybe had a head start, but the government's coming in, trying to close doors, trying to steer customers away. How has that impacted you, your employees, your business? Tell us a little bit about what it's been like for you the last 18 months.
Challenging.
I wouldn't expect, if you told me it was awesome, I'd call you a liar.
Well, every day I'm living the dream.
Yeah, that's actually a great answer, because we're living, right? End of the day, we're still healthy, we're alive, we're smiling.
Yeah.
But those paychecks still need to get signed, and they need to get cashed. So tell us a little bit about some of the things that you've experienced on your end.
Yes. Well, it was interesting, the early days of the pandemic, because it started with actually a nursing home about 20 minutes from where I live here. And we kind of heard, whisperings and rumorings, and then things shut down pretty quickly here. And it went from, oh, this is going to be a brief shutdown, to I have to lay off my entire team to survive. And I've got to say, that was one of the toughest things I've ever done, was calling an all hands meeting. And I'm actually tearing up a little bit, even just thinking about it now, a year and a half later. But, and just, everybody knew it was coming. I was the only person at that meeting that cried. A couple of my staff hugged me and said, you got to do what you got to do. And we knew this was coming, and it's fine. But, I just told them, this is where we're at. I don't know what the future is like. And so we're just going to do what we need to do to survive. And I was just very communicative through the entire process. So I was very fortunate in that I was able to pull back pretty quickly. We did lose a lot of our sales. We have the wholesale side of the business, running our food service and our retail line, our CPG line, and then we have our own brick and mortar. And our wholesale was hit first, actually, because a lot of our coffee shop and cafe partners like instantly shut down. Our retail, we stopped having as much walk-in traffic, but we had just launched about a week and a half before our new website.
Oh, wow. Good time.
Incredible timing. We were very fortunate in that. And so a lot of our customers that couldn't come in or, were afraid to come in, started ordering, pastries that were, shipped. They would order their, 8 loaves of bread and we would ship it, across town. And we did keep our brick and mortar open a little bit because we serve a specialty market and it is a medical necessity for a lot of people. We did maintain very minimal hours so that people could still come in and get products, but it was pretty slow there for a while. And the few staff that I did keep on, I kept on at pretty minimal hours, but they were able to keep the lights on. And we did that for the first several months. And then, PPP kicked in and things started to open up just a little bit more. And, I just took it kind of a month at a time. But,
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. The employees, I've had a lot of guests on this podcast since the pandemic hit. And I think that was the toughest topic for them. It's, you feel responsible, not just for their paycheck, but their livelihood, their mortgages, all that. So it's kind of hard not to feel that guilt, especially as a leader of the organization. But it seems like you were very transparent. You were forthcoming. You shared that empathy with them. So kudos to you for at least having the transparency. I know CEOs, I don't know them personally, but I've read about CEOs that didn't even show up to these meetings. They were just, wrote the letters or sent the emails or made the phone call. So the fact that you took that extra step and really hugging your employees, that's amazing. Kudos to you on that one.
Thanks.
What about current state of affairs? Seems like, you launched the website right in time. So that was sounds like that was your pivot into staying afloat. What other pivots did you take in order you're still kicking and screaming today?
Yeah. Well, I do actually want to circle back to the employee piece just a little bit.
Sure.
One of the other pieces that I did, I've built a culture of open communication.
Love it.
And so one of the things that I was doing was I was sending out COVID updates, whether I would needed to or not, for about every month in the early days there. And it just really helped my employees know that I was still there and that I still had a sense of direction. And because of that, when I was able to start bringing people back, I got my entire staff back, except for one person who moved to California while he was unemployed.
Why would they do that? Talk about that later.
But I'm in an industry that it's, it's very high turnover rates, and there's often not much loyalty. And I've created a very intentional culture where my staff feels seen, they feel heard. And at the end of the day, I am running a business and I have very realistic expectations of, production and needs that are met, but I see them as humans. And it was really wonderful that I felt seen as well in that. So
that's an amazing success rate. The fact that was actually one of my questions later on, but I'm glad you brought it up. That's absolutely amazing.
I can talk culture all day long, Mike. It makes me so excited.
In terms of your employee, wherever he or she is, condolences for the moving to California. I'm pretty sure they're kicking themselves by now, or maybe not. Who knows? But I wish them well.
But sorry, back to pivot though. That was the actual.
Well, that was one of your pivots, right? You kept them in the loop, and you were open to communication. And whether there was a layoff or not happened, the fact that you cared enough to do it eventually motivated them to come back. So that's a great learning point for our listeners here. What else though? What else did you do to swoon them over?
Yeah. Well, the really exciting pivot we did, there was, the website that, our customers could see, and the changes that were happening at our brick and mortar. But kind of what was happening behind the scenes was relaunching our CPG line. So our consumer product goods, we had partnered, like I said, with small scale local food service. So we were in a lot of local coffee shops, cafes. Like some really nice local restaurants, and then a couple of universities and hospitals. And that dried up overnight. And instead of trying to really lean into food service, I just looked at where are people shopping, what do they want? And we'd already laid the groundwork for this, but we just went ahead and really leaned hard into partnering with some local retailers. And so now we have, a full product line. It's 8 products, and it's a full range of savory to sweet. So we have things like a frozen pizza dough that you take home and you bake. And then we have cake slices and brownies, and some of our most popular items from what we've seen, high interest in direct sales. And so we have pretty good coverage here in the Puget Sound region, and we launched down into Oregon earlier this year. And we're looking at launches potentially into California and Idaho, end of Q4, Q1 of next year. So, and that's where we've been pushing really hard, is how do we get our product into more people's hands? And this is how we see it happening in a very real way.
Amazing. Congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you.
To go from that to laying off all employees and now taking your business a step further. That's awesome. How has your day-to-day changed now? You started this business by yourself, and you were doing everything from accounting to production to marketing, et cetera. How has your day-to-day changed now in this business? And are you happy? Because, I've met people, they started cooking, they opened this restaurant, and then next thing you know, they're just playing with receipts all day and shaking hands and, writing checks. How has that changed for you?
Oh, it's changed immensely, Mike. But I just want to be very clear. I love what I do.
Awesome.
Back when I launched the business, I had this very clear path forward for my business, and then I have this very large long-term vision for Nuflours. And then I thought about, well, do I see myself in that long-term vision, and who do I need to become? What are the steps through that in order to continue participating in this business that I want to see happen? And at what point do I need to get off the train, or do I need to level up in some very real ways? And so I've spent the last decade trying to level up as much as possible. So, back in the day, I like I said, I was everything. I was, the product development, I was production, I was, in there baking every day. And then I was taking my product. I was the delivery person. I was delivering those Thanksgiving pies those first few years before we had, distribution. We now have 5 distributors, by the way, much easier. And so I went from, working in the business all day, every day, and then having, a few hours on Monday afternoons to try and do development work, to fast forward 10 years later, having managers that are managing the boots on the ground crew, so to speak. And more what I'm doing is managing teams almost, although teams sounds a little bit extravagant because we are still a very small crew. But, I have, someone in finance, we have, an accountant, we have a bookkeeper. And so instead of me having to, tally all of those receipts and shake all of those hands, I have someone tallying those receipts. I have someone shaking those hands. And what I'm doing is really conducting the orchestra. And for me, the greatest satisfaction is knowing that I have people that are doing their jobs better than I could ever do them. And knowing that that means my business is growing and that we're accomplishing what I really set out to, which is get good quality food into people's hands.
One of my favorite quotes, Phoebe, is from Steve Jobs, is I didn't hire smart people, amazing people, so I could tell them what to do. It's so they could tell me what to do. And that's how Apple exploded, just because of that little concept alone. Love it. Very inspiring. If you had to give some advice to that gal that grew up in that small town on a farm with her family and wanted to start a business, what advice would you give? And not just to a gal, but actually, to a gal. I want to hear that. You're a strong woman, you're a successful entrepreneur. I want to hear, what advice would you give to that lady that wants to start her own journey?
Well, I'd say to a very young Phoebe, be kinder to yourself.
Ah, that's a good one. Were you hard on yourself early on or
I
putting
was.
pressure on yourself?
I have very high standards. I'd call myself a hyperachiever. And so I still struggle with this. I am challenged to slow down and appreciate what I've built, or to even be grateful. Like I'll accomplish something, or my team will do something, and I'll say, okay, that's great, next. Instead of just saying, hey, let's have a moment, ring that bell, celebrate.
Hit the gong. There you go.
And so I'm not kidding. I have this row of Post-its, hanging above my laptop here. And one of them says, appreciate what I've created. And
Love
it's
it.
right at eye level. And I see that every morning when I start my day. And I just try and have that moment of be kind, acknowledge, appreciate. And if I can start my day with that tone, I'm putting that into my team. They're putting it into the food. They're putting it into their interactions. And we're building a better thing.
Love it. That's actually one of my questions too, is what would you tell the younger 18-year-old Phoebe? But so you're right ahead of me. Are you sure you're not one of those oh yeah, you got the psychic thing happening too. That might be
Maybe we were sisters in another life.
You go, girl. But last question for you, Phoebe. What is your vision for Nuflours? Like, where do you want to see this business in the next 5 years, 10 years? Would love to hear, because you have had so many visions that you've put into fruition. So I want to hear what the next thing is for Phebe Rossi and Nuflours in general.
Yes. Well, my long-term vision is for Nuflours to be synonymous with gluten-free.
Love it.
Yeah, we're clean label, we're allergen friendly, gluten-free, all of that. And I just, when somebody says, oh, I need something gluten-free, they go, oh, let's get Nuflours.
Love it. And think about being on a Shark Tank or one of these days or anything along those lines.
I've thought about it. Yeah, they do have the pitch contest does come around every once in a while. So yeah.
I think you've got the right personality and got positivity and definitely the product. So why the heck not?
Thanks.
Well, Phoebe, it's been an absolute privilege and honor meeting you. I was excited to meet you when I saw your product and your website and your overall LinkedIn profile, and you did not disappoint. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you for starting your business and showing not just all entrepreneurs, but women out there that they're able to achieve something even through a pandemic, still thrive and still continue to grow, get their staff back, etc. I wish you all the best. Continue crushing it out there and please stay in touch.
Thank you for having me, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. Have a great one, Phoebe.